results that get published. So we all ask you for oral consent, and this is implicit oral consent. If you stay on the call, you give us basically oral consent to use this data in anonymous ways for the specific purposes of, on one hand, we want to write up a report draft of this and the next two focus groups in the coming months. I want to present already the first and the second focus group during the Crypto Commons gathering end of August, to which all of you are warmly invited, of course. And also I'm gonna use all three focus groups we're conducting as data for my dissertation, which should be finished in the coming 2 years. And I will happily share all of that with you. But also we had a conversation with Livy yesterday about several other research initiatives and case studies being written, and about the idea of pooling data and coming to a stronger data set by sharing it with others. But in that case, we would already share it anonymized, so we can ensure we can ensure confidentiality.
And also, I mean, this is just to facilitate this meeting today. We have some kind of like guidelines, or like we wanted to introduce you shortly. So of course, this is kind of like a discussion. We are doing like a focus group discussion. So there's no right or wrong answers. It's more like exploring different points of view to a topic. And also, like, because we are recording this, it's really important and just one person speaks at a time. So yeah, I think it's also like try to speak with clear voice as possible. And of course, you also don't need to like agree with others, but of course, it's important to listen respectfully so others can also share their opinions. And our role is a bit to guide this discussion.
Right, but we will try to leave our own opinion outside of this conversation.
Yes. And of course, also it's like you are also allowed to talk to each other and to like directly respond to like what is made. And we will also like, it's important to limit a bit the time you can speak. So because we have just a very like, this is a limited time frame. So also allow us to, as moderators, kindly and politely interrupt you after like 3-4 minutes talking.
Right. Do you have any questions to any of the things we said so far? We still have some time for clarifications before we want to start. And I'll be right back in 10 seconds.
Okay.
Okay, so for the first question, we use Mentimeter to see what are the most important values for each of you in the context of token engineering. And we ask you to give us your 3 most important values for you personally. Lydia already shared the link in
I don't know if you have experience with Mentimeter, but yes, you should open the link and then you have to use the code.
Can I ask you, where did you share the link?
In the chat, the Omega working group.
All right.
Chat.
Yeah, there is a, we can also use a top chat and in this screen, if you go to the screen here,
Okay.
we can also use that tool because it's easier to find it here.
Okay. I can also put it there.
Thank
you.
So we just, the Mentimeter goes straight to entry boxes for 3 words. We should just do it now. It doesn't ask for the code though.
It doesn't ask for a code. Okay.
Is that expected?
Okay, if you don't.
Okay.
Okay.
Then then we proceed without the code. That's great.
Cool.
And then we just answer, do we have a time frame to answer this? Like 5 minutes, 2 minutes?
Yeah, let's say 3 minutes.
I think I also need to start with the, just a second.
All right.
So I shared it here as well.
Thank you.
Link.
Okay, so we give you 2-3 minutes for the first question.
So after entering 3 words, it asks to go to the next question. But when I go to the next question, it says, please wait for the presenter to show the next slide. Is that the expected behavior?
Yes, because yes, you're just allowed to enter three values.
Okay.
Okay, then we can go to the next one.
It still shows the same screen to
Yeah.
me.
It still says, please wait for the presenter to show next slide.
Okay, it's
Now,
working now?
yes.
Okay. So on
Thank
the
you.
next question, we would be interested which core values of TC do you know? And we
But-
refer here to the
Right, we've referred to your defined value set. So please don't look it up, only what you remember. It's okay if you don't remember all of them. There should be 11. We gave you 8 slots. So actually, yeah, eight is enough. And also, if you don't remember any, that's also a finding. Okay, how are you doing, guys? Do you need more time?
I'm good.
I'm good.
I'm good.
Hey, just a second. Lydia is going to paste the first Mentimeter outcomes into the chat. And it's our task now to identify the three most important values, or the three values that we want to look at closer in the rest of the focus group. And as, like, for example, for transparency, there someone wrote transparent, another one wrote transparency, that's obviously one, and so on. So it should be, the size of the word should show how often it was mentioned, but as some have been written differently, we have to yeah, work on it a bit.
So it's in the chat now, so you can open
Yes.
the first one, yes?
Right. So to me, it seems we definitely have transparency, and the transparency horizontally and transparent vertically. That makes, I would say, at least 3 counts for transparency. We find open source, radically open source, and knowledge sharing, which I would put in the same basket as a commons, as immaterial commons. So that, yeah, open source would get 3 counts for me as well. Transparency gets 3 counts. Sustainability is big as well, because then, yeah, ethical is mentioned at least 2 times. There's ethical and ethical engineering. And we also have inclusion at least 2 times. I found it, yeah, inclusion and inclusivity. Other things that I don't see double are non-corruptible, transversality, responsibility, trust, trust, validated, context, safety, and abundance economics. Anyone have a champion that they think should definitely be in the rest of the focus group, because there either are problems or challenges, or this value makes a perfect case of how to practically implement values in your daily work. Like, a positive example would also be a reason to include.
Can you repeat that again?
Sorry, say again?
Can you repeat what you're asking again, please?
I'm asking you to help us identify and settle for 3 values that we want to take a closer look at in the rest of the focus group. And this could be both, I mean, on one hand, they should be named here and ideally be named several times. On the other hand, these should be values where either you feel that the TEC has a problem, or that there are challenges in practical implementation of these values. Or you feel, on the other hand, that this is an exceptionally well implemented value, and we can look at that as a best practice example, let's say. But, like, we want to narrow it down now on 3 of these values. and I ask your help for that.
So I'm following Livia's leads and writing them down on the chat. So maybe I don't know if you want them that verbally or written, but
Yes, maybe it's a good idea to put them in the chat and then we can.
Yeah, that's great.
Yes, great.
Okay. So it seems to me sustainability and transparency are clear champions. Else, 3 votes. Else, well, abundance and economics and trust were also mentioned so far. Open source is now also there. Open source has 2 votes. Trust now also has 2 votes, but open source has 3. Transversality is mentioned, yeah. Okay. Did anyone cast at max 3 votes? Yeah, please only 3 votes. Okay. Looks to me like everyone pretty much cast a vote, and that makes abundance. Okay, so that's 1. So transparency, sustainability, sustainability, transparency. Plus transparency, open source. Again, also open source. Plus transversality.
Okay.
There's nicht Teil Umsatz, Umsatz. Okay, we have clearly an interest in sustainability and transparency. Each of them got 5 votes. Now
And then we have trust and.
trust or open source. Trust
So yes, we should agree if you would prefer to discuss about trust or about open source. No, so maybe you can write your preference in the chat.
or give a verbal input on why you think the one or the other.
I will just say that for me the value of trust, it's sort of part of the values where the open source tackles the technical part of the values that we maybe are missing on this context. So I feel like I will go for open source just for the sake of having a technical value, if you want to think about it, because it's a value that is not only technical but it's also human and so on. And I feel that transparency and sustainability are more focused about systems. So I feel this one, it's trust. I feel that it's more about cultural build and so on. It's just my opinion.
Yeah. What I'm also missing is the context of token engineering. Like these are all values that bring us to Web3 or maybe towards tokens. But yeah, like that's actually something I would like to be part of the focus group. What values do we add or do we want to preserve or capture with respect to token engineering commons? So that's something actually is interesting that also comes out in this initial questions. Like these are generic values or general values that brings us to the space, but why are we flocking around token engineering, which is actually quite specific, even if it is impenetrable. But it is, yeah, why did we choose token engineering, even for common stack, right? Why did we choose to make that the first commons to hatch and so on? So I'm missing the context, just adding it here.
I
The
think
idea
that
is we will discuss now the values more deeper in the next.
Right. We will discuss them mostly
Our
practically
session.
in the context of token engineering and the TEC.
I mean, I would suggest we start now with the sustainability, transparency.
Yeah.
I mean, or maybe we just.
Well, yeah.
This, like,
How about we don't decide? We take 4 of them. We take both trust and open source and see whether and where we find them overlapping. And we continue with the next set of questions.
Mhm.
So now we want to go on each of the 4 values a bit deeper and see. Yeah. And see what do they mean to you in the context of token engineering. So that could go in the direction of, well, I mean, if you want, you can provide a brief definition or working definition. You don't have to. You can also go towards why is it important for the TE community, and even personally, like, did you have this value in mind, or did you subscribe to it before you entered TEC, or did that change something in your value set? So
and out of the 4 values we selected now, we pre-selected who's the 1 or 2 most important. I don't think that we have time to that every one of you goes to each value, but yeah, what is the most important for you?
So please don't feel obliged to speak to each and every of the 4, but only where you think what you want to say hasn't been said before and what you want to say is relevant. Who wants the recipe for totalitarianism? Who wants that? No, who wants to start?
We'll give them 2-3 minutes to think about.
Right. Sorry. We'll give you 2 and something minutes again to think about this first question and which of the values, transparency, sustainability, trust, and open source, you want to speak about.
So we basically have 2 minutes to think about the relevance and about these 4 values and which 2 are the most important for us.
No, you don't have to stick to the 2. Like, just go for the values you really want to contribute to, because if you do it for all 4 with all of us, it's too little time.
So we provide a verbal definition for these values and a bit of context.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And are we reflecting on these values with respect to token engineering as a discipline or the token engineering commons?
Now we are in token engineering as a discipline. We will talk in the next question. We'll talk about the TEC more concretely.
Got it.
Thank you.
And sorry, where does this thinking happen on my notepad, or shall I put it somewhere?
That is fine. We will transcribe everything we are talking here.
Okay.
Okay, are you ready? Anyone need more time? Okay. Okay then, who wants to start and on which value? And then I suggest that we stay on that value for a bit.
And others who have something to contribute, like are invited to share also.
I
Can
want
start.
to talk. No, sorry, Edu.
Go ahead. No. Go ahead, Irene.
I heard you first, Irene. Please start.
Okay, sorry about talking on top of you, Edu. I want to start to talk about trust. I believe it's the value that I care about most in the TEC, because I believe that it's the basis for transparency, for integrity, for collaboration, and it creates the safe spaces, the inclusiveness. It's like for me, it's the basis. So it's necessary for accountability. That's really important for work culture. And I also think that is essential if we want to self-manage and be autonomous. So yeah, I value trust. That's my share. Thank you. I just want to add to it that it's the most complex value and it's an emergent one. And that's the only thing I want to share because it's definitely important. But it's something that cannot be engineered.
I will challenge that opinion, and I think it can be engineered. Trust can be built as part of our cultural build. I think we can build trust in our tools. We can build trust in our systems, and just reinforce that trust through community building and exercises that apply for people to rely on these systems, tokens, or humans in a way that is based on trust. At the same time, I do agree that it's a value that it's heavily undermined and undervalued, and at the same time, it's a value that is really easy to break. You just need a failure, a point of failure that it's doesn't necessarily be big, but a point of failure can affect the entire system. So I think it's a value that is codependent on other values. It's not, the blockchain is transparent by itself, you could say. So, but the trust is not a value that it's by itself acquired. So that's it's interesting for me, but it's a tricky one, let's say.
I like the value of trust as well. So I'm glad that we chose this one to start with. And if I look at it from the perspective of the field of token engineering, I think that non-crypto people have a very difficult time trusting in crypto economic systems, and that is one of the biggest challenges for token engineering, is having people trust one, that it has any relevance and that it has any feasibility. But more importantly, we have a series of mainstream media articles around rug pulls, scams, crypto funds that have gone bankrupt, that have over leveraged, that have overextended. So my personal feeling is trust is probably the most difficult thing for token engineering to gain from what not people who are not familiar with how these systems work right now, and the enormous positive potential of token engineering.
Thanks for sharing. Anything else you would like to add for trust?
Right. We have like 1 minute more max to stay on trust.
Contribution, if there is.
Or if not, let's go.
Yeah, sorry, I got busy. And no, I would completely agree with what Irene was saying. I share that as well. I think trust is it's kind of like the basis for everything. I would say everything that has anything to do with humans, right? Because at the end, I think we all kind of rely on trust to do things. And I think if better trust is built on any field or in any group, it's way easier to start organizing yourself and start to build on top of the other values that you require to be abundant, or to complete your mission, right? So yeah, I just think it's a really basic, really important value.
Okay, even though I shouldn't agree, I also agree that it's essential and at the same time incredibly difficult to grasp. Like notoriously difficult in social sciences. Research on trust is a nightmare. An exciting nightmare. I tried to incorporate in my master thesis and I failed. Let's jump to the next value. Let's go with transparency. That might be an easier one. So, what does transparency mean to you in the context of token engineering?
Well, I'll take a shot at it, and maybe to convolute or to muddy the waters, say transparency is one of the ways to build trust. But I think transparency, the value that transparency brings is the ability to understand how systems are working. And it's a little bit related, I guess, to open source as well. But if I stick with transparency and, token engineering, I mean, there's a few things. There's the way to proliferate the education of token engineering by being transparent versus things happening in private where nobody can see or learn from what's happening. And there's the way of building trust in the systems that are being built or in the discipline itself by allowing people to see what's happening.
I will say that transparency for me, I will always refer to this. Michael Sargam had this tweet, very random tweet in a very random discussion, where he basically said to someone, I don't know who that person was, but he said to someone, transparency is nothing without accessibility. Like if you don't have access to transparency doesn't mean anything. And that makes such a click to me, in the sense of I feel transparency, it's like a two-word concept that needs to be tied to the concept of accessibility. Otherwise, it's just a passive value that is not, because we already have transparency implicit on blockchain, but not necessarily actively present as accessible in our systems. So for me, I wouldn't be like I changed my speech a few years ago. Like I wouldn't be able to talk about transparency, and I don't care how transparent you are. For example, when people make audits of tokens, and they're like, "Oh, this is very transparent. Information is there," and I'm like, but how easy is that information accessed and so on? So for me, I would just make that little tweak to the concept of that value of transparency, and rather than being a passive value, to make it an active value.
Definitely agree, and especially on the transparency without making things accessible, especially for token engineers, is an option. You can just run your simulation, do your job, and be done with it, or you can, go the extra mile to actually make those not just accessible, but maybe even enable participants to co-create, not just understand, but shape their economies. And that's something actually ABC and how it was presented and how it was partied around in discourse was really one of the role model actions. However, like transparency in and on itself and the level of transparency we have on blockchains and people actually being too transparent, like we don't take enough value of the privacy and maybe even collective investing into privacy preservation of these participatory networks. That's one big research area question. Just a side remark, I guess, not questioning what has been said, just a side remark that actually that is something we also need to value, privacy, while participating in these global networks.
Okay, thank you. Someone else want to add something for transparency, like a last comment before?
Yeah, doesn't have to be. Can also open the next round on open source or sustainability.
I want to mention something about transparency. I agree with what Edu said, and I want to add that documentation and tooling is crucial for transparency. If I go into the SEP hub of the TEC, I search for every detail, and I took the job to read every line, so I didn't got too much from it. So transparency, it's there, but it's not there, so it's important. And I want to say I will get out almost about now because I have a client waiting.
Thank you, Irene.
Yeah, thank you for joining.
Okay,
I
then
would like to go for sustainability, if that is okay.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's move.
Because that was the one value where it actually clicked for me, that it's really important in context of token engineering, because sustainability in token engineering, or from the token engineering perspective, is that you identify the fundamental value, like what is the intrinsic value that can be captured by this token ecosystem. And if you don't go deep enough to figure that out, what you do is actually unethical. It is hard to go there, and you can be transparent about this is an experiment, we're doing this first step to gather information and so on, but not speaking about the fact that one has not yet identified the fundamental value that is going to be captured by this token ecosystem. Communicating that gap so it gets actually filled is, I believe, super important. And without that, it then also becomes very quickly this vanity metrics in the startup world, or in our world, number go up engineering, coupled with social engineering, like you're drawing people into, but actually it is, it is a numbers games that happens very quickly, and we saw it in DeFi, especially if the markets are hot. That's almost where you're really pushed into, and that's one aspect where token engineers really need the space where they can develop that self-trust and the strength, not to budge in those moments. And so sustainability is tied to fundamental value, and the job of a token engineer or someone who sees them as part of designers of a token economy is really to get at it and communicate as long as one is in this experimental exploration phase. And once that value is captured, again, that is then becomes sustainable, and the act of getting there is ethical engineering. And and that's where actually transparency or the blockchain, that is what I wanted to add, is then the whole blockchain automation, information accessibility, the possibility of transparency does the rest. But again, I guess that is to also add to sustainability, that you need to go the extra mile to make it accessible as well, for it to become actually sustainable.
Hello, Jeff. We are currently having a discussion here at your right. We are on the question of, we are going through values, and right now we are talking about sustainability in the context of TE. So I will just quickly talk, and if you feel like talking and provide an answer, please do. So for me, the context of sustainability, it's a very interesting one, because I feel that everyone seamlessly aims to build it, but it gets so hard for people to actually build sustainable systems. And I feel that sustainability, it's a value that relies heavily on context. That's why I added the value of context, because I feel people build more systematic systems, if that's a word. Like, we tend to build things that we think that work, but we are not contrasting really if that system works for all the other peoples or all the other users. So I feel it becomes this very decontextualized value. So in a sense of sustainability, is like, yes, it's sustainable. It seems that it's sustainable in my model, in my mathematical model. But okay, how about the social part, and how about the cultural? Like, how do you contextualize this? And I feel that this is the part that we are failing, and that's why we need more token engineers, because we lack context in the building of these systems. Trained or aiming to be sustainable, or they are sustainable for a very short period of time, and no one actually study why it only was sustainable for a short period of time. We just pass to the next protocol, we just pass to the next token, and forget about the last before. So for me, that's something that it seems that sustainability, it's a coin of trade. It's like something that you just use for your benefit, but not necessarily contextualized. So that's it.
Okay, thank you, Edo. Unfortunately, we just realized 3 values is enough. Like, so we would ask you if anyone has a huge problem with dropping open source from list of values, because then we run into time issues. Maybe the next round. Sorry for that. But yeah, we now want to focus more on how these values, transparency, sustainability, and trust, are represented or embodied in the TEC. And I just go a bit quicker than last question. So maybe just throw in on any of them. How do you feel them represented or embodied in the TEC? How often and where or in which situation are you discussing these values in abstract or concrete? Yeah, again, like take 2 minutes.
And
this
are
in
we
the
the same?
Menti app? Sorry.
No, my question is
No?
just, are we using the same 3 as before?
Yes, the same 3 values. Like just more concretely, how does that happen in the TEC?
Do you want us to write down, or do you want us to verbally explain it?
We want you to verbally explain it, but of course you can also drop notes in the chat before that if you like.
Thank you. Jeff, do you have a question?
I was just wondering if we were doing this within the app or within the chat. I was just catching up on the chat, and I wasn't sure if we were doing this in the Menti app or that was a previous part where we were sourcing the
That was
values and
previous.
now we're discussing them.
Yes, when we identified some values we are discussing now.
Yeah, so we do it in the chat and verbally. Hi, Mert. Just to let you know where we are, we identified 3 values in the context of TE that we want to focus on in this focus group, and the 3 values are trust, transparency, and sustainability. And we talked about the importance of these values in token engineering. And now, question now is more concretely, how are these values represented or embodied in the TEC? We communicate via chat here and then verbally in rounds add opinions and comments to each of these values. Okay. Edu, thank you so much for writing these elaborate definitions. I love it. That's very useful for us. You do all the transcribing. Let's maybe just start with what you started with. Transparency is one of the values that is embodied on a working group, but also has been built in and growth in the entire community, has been built and grown in the entire community. It's one of the easiest to exemplify and the easiest to empower, since it and to empower an individual since it had very low knowledge barrier.
Mm-hmm. And we have Jeff saying that transparency refers to auditability of spending, group discussions, and decision making. Not do with transparency. I guess.
Yeah. But for us as outsiders, would you give us maybe examples of
Transparency.
of how transparency is embodied? Yeah.
Or it's maybe lived. I don't know.
Or
Yeah,
like how you do with auditability of spending, how group discussions are kept transparent, how decision making is transparent. I mean, I
yeah.
have ideas how we work, but
I think that we have Septi, which is the steward of the transparency working group here. So I think no one better than him to explain this. If you can, Septi, at the moment. If you are talking, Septi, we cannot hear you. Or maybe you can talk. All right. So I will just explain. So basically, the examples are very simple. We basically keep check of things and we communicate these check-ins. So this check-in could be in the form of an audit of the spending. This check-in could be on what happened on the working group with recording all our calls. So all our calls from the past 2 years have been recorded and uploaded to YouTube. So you have an archive of every of our activities for the past 2 years. Then you also have the decision making. We make a very extensive process to make sure that all the stakeholders are at least on the know about the decision making process and how to access to the decision making process. This is something that we sort of also work on because our governance was not necessarily very transparent. So we work on making sure that we consolidate this knowledge into a process that could be easier to understand. And then, for example, Septimus and Transparency, they make audits of every working group expenses if they compile with what they request. All of the processes that are requesting funds are also happening publicly. You can check all our salaries, our spending, everything happens publicly. So that's a little bit of examples of how we achieve transparency.
thank you. Mm. Cool. Could I access this document as well, or is it gated to TEC members?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Shall we move to the next value? Maybe go with sustainability first because I
Just
think trust is the
adding
hardest.
to it, because the example that Irene brought, that she all of this transparency archiving creates a lot of information, right? That maybe also needs further digesting for people, because at some point it just becomes too much. So the accessibility point again is something we maybe sense as the first ones in this space, and that's what Token Engineering Commons does or happens a lot actually. it seems we're always the ones, or Token Engine Commons is always the ones to hit the pain points first, and then also handle that very transparently. The saying.
I'd like to add something on transparency as well before we move to the next one. And it is also related to what Irena mentioned. Being transparent is sort of one of the core pillars of the TEC, but there is a real effort required to upkeep transparency. The example that she gave is like one of the best examples I could imagine. In GitHub or in ZenHub, the issues are only as good as the upkeep of the issues, and oftentimes work streams can move into like private DMs and into non-transparent mediums that or non-transparent channels that we have to sort of like pull ourselves back to trying to upkeep the transparency by updating issues so that more than just the people who are so that the work that's happening is visible to everyone in the community and not just the people on the private DMs. So I think transparency actually has a is expensive, I guess I could say, in some ways, because it requires constant upkeep and constant awareness that what we're practicing is visible to the community. And oftentimes, I think that we also fail short of that, even though it's something that we're very keen on respecting.
Also, just to add on to that, this is more, I guess, like a question that I have is, how do you know, like, because I feel like there are levels of transparency. So as an organization, as a group, how do you know, or when do you know that you've reached the right level of transparency in your community? And also, what are kind of like the metrics or the symptoms that you can find to know if you are actually being transparent, you know? And once you get that, like, how do you improve your practices, you know? Like, what are the best transparency practices out there, you know? I feel those are more like questions, right, that I don't really know, but might be interesting to think about.
I will say, sorry, Tam. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just throw one thing in. It's also not necessarily comfortable or I would say quote unquote natural for people to be so transparent. I think for the TEC community, we are very unique in the way that every single working call is recorded and published on YouTube publicly for anyone anywhere to see. And that's not an environment that most of us come from. We're not used to every single meeting we're in being available publicly on YouTube immediately after the call. So it's also an adjustment. Yeah, I guess that's one of the costs of transparency is adjusting to being so publicly, like to sharing your opinion, to sharing your thoughts, to having conflict, to resolving conflict so publicly.
Just
Sorry.
a quick answer to what Bear asked. I feel that for me, the practical answer to what Bear 100 asked is like, if you have a question, I should have the answer accessible for you. Like, I should have a way to redirect you through that clarity. So if the organization is not able to provide clarity to your doubts, your questions, then you are not transparent enough. And it could not be necessarily an entire organization. Maybe it's just a part of the organization that is not clear enough. And I feel that the way you measure transparency is just by the input, the constant input from newcomers and new people who dive into your space and realize, hey, I don't know, I don't have our answer for you. I don't have this ready, or you know. So for me, it's about having the capacity to provide answers in a clear way and clarifying way. If you achieve that through your organization, you're transparent enough. And the way you sort of keep track of that, it's by either self accountability of the organization, or either by contrast with new people sort of making this check for you.
Yeah, thank you, dude. Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think a whole conversation can come up from that. I I do agree on that, and I guess I also wonder like how can this part can be also maybe in a way be automated, or had to do more with automated systems, and maybe not just depend on always having a person like in the front desk answering your questions, but more like in a kind of say like permissionless or like by yourself. You just know that the place where you are is transparent. Like how can we achieve that? And also like what Tom's saying, what are the costs of achieving that, right? I think I also agree on that we come from a system that, and I don't think it's just the system. I also think that as people, we also like to have certain things private, right? A private life, so it's like drawing that line between, in terms of working spaces, organizations, where is that line written? So yeah, I think it's a great conversation, but thank you.
So Lydia and me, due to time issues, decided to merge the next question, which is on the practical applicability. I mean, we have already been going there in last questions or in the conversation anyway. So I would ask you, before we jump to the next value, sustainability, to think about about concrete examples of doing something differently because the TEC has embraced the value of transparency. Where do you do so? Okay, I mean, we had already things like recording every conversation and putting it on YouTube, but maybe you can come up with one or two more.
And maybe write it also in the chat.
Yeah, right.
Only for transparency or for the other two values too?
For the other as well, but for the others we will go back into how is the value represented or embodied in the TEC, and then concrete examples of where did your workflow change due to this value? What do you do differently?
Okay, so for the now, just things that I will change about transparency in the TEC.
No, not things that you would like to change,
No.
but what you already are doing, like which kind of practices or which kind of
concrete examples of things that you do only because this value is a value of the TEC, and if we're not, you would do it differently.
Maybe we keep to the one value per. Otherwise, it's going to be too complicated or complex.
I mean, I have two concrete examples I would throw out. One is just in our Scrum process, the idea of mutually planning our tasks for the next 2 weeks for our working groups, having the sprint retrospective where we are transparent about successes and failures, and iterate on introspect on what we can fix, and then in the future sprint and the community call where we share with the entire community progress from each working group. So it's all part of the sort of Scrum process where transparency is one of the 3 fundamental pillars of the framework. And the second one I would say is advice process. Advice process is designed specifically to be transparent. So to, ask first for a small decision, ask people that are affected by that decision, to then bring it to your working group, and then eventually posting it on the forum so that anyone in the community or anyone who reads the forum can then post on it. So I would say those are 2 concrete examples where where transparency is conducted, for lack of a better word.
Great. I would suggest to go to the next value now that we had also sustainability.
Yeah. So, right. How is sustainability embodied in the TEC? And what are concrete examples of doing things differently because this value, because the TEC thrives to to embody this value?
That's quite complex because also token engineering commons gathered around the commons token engineering. That thing which we say is emergent fields, transdisciplinary, and we said it's going to be radically open source, inclusive, meaning we really committed to connect this knowledge, connect the people generating this knowledge, building that commons in my worldview, right? And then there is the technical worldview of the common pool. That's just the RepTex dies that are in there and managing that sustainably and using the straightforward 8 principles of Ostrom to manage the commons. But now, now that we see, okay, if you use from when you just look at what is visible, what is tangible, what is accounted for in numbers, and you don't see the big, and you forget about because this big endeavor that we set out to reach. How are we going to create this value commons? And we just only focus on, oh, is that tokens in the commons pools are getting less and less, and we need to make it more and more. We are risking, and that's also related to transparency. If you just track numbers on a ledger, and if you only focus on that, that transparency is actually channeling our attention into a narrow, this profit-oriented way, and we right now we risk to become short-sighted, like all those corporations that we left, right? To actually figure this one out. So yeah, I think I want to say right now we're at this very interesting stage where on one hand we have this very visible commons that we need to take care of, but also the invisible knowledge-based, relation-based, trust-based, engineering-based commons that we set out to build, and we are not even close or near, right? So practically, we're in the middle of this situation, and it is very important that we, make our value system fully aware again, and take whatever is necessary to continue the path why we created this commons.
I also think that something that we are trying to be sustainable is to also be able to offer services to other communities. For example, Gravity is trying to provide mediation and case management services and education services to other communities. And hopefully with a lot of clients, Gravity aspires that we can receive funding from our service offering and not so much from the common pool of the TEC. And also we are thinking on iterating on the TEC framework and designing our own token economy, thinking of Gravity as a commons around conflict management, the same way that the TEC is a commons around the token engineering field.
Could we say that this currently very important topic of how the TEC gets to additional revenue in order to fund its longer term vision and longer term sustainability, the sustainability of the actual knowledge commons that you are building requires or is a result of the need for a technical or financial sustainability. Like you can only get to the wider sense if you manage the more closed financial sustainability. I mean, these are clearly related in a way.
Yeah, and I will say that this aspect that you asked regarding how the values changed through time in the TEC is like at the beginning, it was an unconscious thought or naive, doesn't matter, but we had this sort of thought that by being sustainable in the way we designed the token, that was that sort of guarantee in some way the sustainability of the rest of our economy. And then we immediately, after the launch of the token, realized that was not the case. So we had to look for ways to be sustainable outside the scope of the token design. And that was something that changed through time also, because it was not something present in the conversations before the launch of the token, but it was more after the launch of the token.
I'd like to add something too. I think that the idea of financial stability is one dimension that we are in the process of reevaluating and looking for, additional financial revenue creations in the TEC, which can only help the TEC, of course. But also, I think that there's other elements of sustainability that we can also be proud of, I would say. We have certain rituals and practices that create sustainability of our culture and of the some of the key pillars of the TEC. So very open, very transparent, promoting open source education, research. And yeah, I think that's an important dimension to acknowledge as well.
So we have to interrupt discussion now on sustainability and go to the last value.
Trust.
Yes, trust. So how trust is represented or like embodied in TC, and also again like concrete examples of what are you doing differently because of this value.
Because you value trust, right?
I think that sometimes when we rely too much on technology, we trust in technology and not in people. And sometimes these trustless systems like Web3 foster to not trust people. But I think that in the TC we are intentionally building trust, understanding that human coordination is what fuels the stability of the systems that we have. And I think that's a real good thing that we have done in the cultural build, that we took a lot of time to develop a culture, to get to know each other, to work together. And I think it's also something that has been building with time, and that we've met sometimes, and some of the contributors we've met in real life, and that we have been um, sharing not only as co-workers but also as friends and as a family, and that is really cool around trust.
Maybe I'll throw something else in as well. The to some extent, by sharing governance, we are trusting in the collective wisdom of the community, and that's sort of an element of just participating in a DAO and having governance be shared across all members in the community.
Okay. If nobody feels the urge to contribute any more to this question on trust, we want to now, as the last part of this focus group, look a bit more at challenges that you encounter in applying and promoting these values in the TEC. So again, for each of these three values: trust, transparency, and sustainability, where do you see problems, challenges, recurring issues in applying them in daily interactions in real life?
I think also that some of the things that we're offering are very related to innovation, so that there is still not such a wide market for like conflict management services in DAOs, or for like even T services, and we are growing that market. So I think also that something that is a challenge for sustainability is that we are pioneering, and that we are opening a market that is still being developed.
Hey, anyone have a challenge with trust, creating or maintaining trust, or also trusting others or the actions of others or the data you get from others? Okay, well, I take that as a no. There are no obvious or identifiable challenges with trust or transparency or sustainability that can be at least clearly named and outlined here. We came to that question because we had the implicit assumption that there could be, or we're looking for, a mismatch between formulated values and everyday experience. With the aim of then asking you, how could some of these values be made more easy to apply in practice? On one hand, what would need to change on the value definition? On the other hand, what could maybe change in daily interaction to make more space for explicitly incorporating values or reminding participants of these? But as you are pretty quiet on challenges and problems,
Well, I just want to point out that we did talk about the challenges for sustainability and transparency already. So maybe that's why I didn't think it necessary to repeat them. And then
I'm just trying to pull more.
to pull more. I mean, I'm really struggling to think of something for trust. The thing that is starting to come to mind is, building trust with new members in the community. So as people, how do we exhibit trustworthiness to new members who enter? I think that there's some level of reputation and experience to build together. That I'm really struggling to look for the challenges around trust as well.
Yeah, and I think there's an implicit current situation with trust, which is the fact that you have seen many spaces fail at their users. So people have a general sentiment of being hesitant of the crypto Web3 space. So I feel like that's a current situation that is not necessarily only about the TEC, but it's just a sentiment of the ecosystem that there is a lack of trust in certain systems, and everything that seems maybe too edgy or too complicated or too new have a natural sort of hesitance to build trust with that. And Stan mentioned the new members. The new members, how like to convey this information to them. Also, it's also that's something that could be a reason for struggles. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now we have at least some challenges with each of these, and I'm sure that maybe some of you will memorize other challenges in the next in the coming days. Maybe you come across them. We're happy for direct messages if something comes to mind. Now maybe.
So maybe in the end, we would just like to ask you if there's anything else you would like to mention about values and how they're applied in TC. Something that we hadn't, like something that we forgot maybe, or that hasn't already been mentioned. And also doesn't have to be connected to the 3 values we like identified. It can be also a bit more broader.
Yeah, like let's say if we did another of these focus groups, what would you like us to focus differently than on today?
Yeah, I will say that just and this is something that it's just a feedback in the sense of the meeting. Like in general, meetings in the TEC last like an hour. So also like just maybe time with just a sound or have a clear public agenda about the meeting will be clear for us because we tend to have public agendas and share the screen and just be able to immediately like think in advance while you're talking and then being able to convey the information in a better way. I think that will be really helpful for a follow next focus group, just because this is a little bit of how we have the meetings here. Usually we never have meetings that last more than an hour. So that could become a challenge for many people to engage with. Yeah, so that will be my two feedback will be that one, and secondly to have some form of public agenda that people can know when they jump in what we are talking about currently and what has been the previous conversation.